You know what's fascinating about the history of hacking? It started before computers even existed, which means humans have been finding ways to exploit technology since the moment technology was invented. We didn't even wait for electricity to arrive before we started being sneaky with it. The first recorded hack happened in 1878. Alexander Graham Bell had just patented the telephone 2 years earlier, and already, teenage boys working as phone operators were pranking callers by switching their lines to the wrong people. The technology was 2 years old. The paint wasn't even dry on the patent, and someone said, "You know what would be funny? We've been like this forever." But the real story of modern hacking, the kind that eventually gave us ransomware, data breaches, and my personal favorite, 123456, appearing on every most common passwords list for the past 20 years, that story starts with a cereal box, a blind whistler, and Steve Jobs selling illegal electronics out of his college dorm. Yes, really. So let's trace the evolution of hackers from breakfast cereal criminals to state-sponsored cyber armies, and maybe, just maybe, you'll finally understand why your IT department keeps emailing you about phishing tests. Before there was computer hacking, there was phone phreaking. And before you ask, yes, that's spelled with a PH, because nothing says underground subculture like replacing letters for no reason. In the 1960s, AT&T, which had a monopoly on American phone service because apparently that was fine back then, used something called in-band signaling. Basically, the same lines that carried your voice also carried the control tones that routed calls. And those tones? Just audio frequencies that any sufficiently motivated person could recreate. The magic number was 2600 hertz. That specific tone told AT&T switches that a line was idle and ready for routing. If you could generate that tone, you could essentially become your own telephone operator. Free long-distance calls, access to international lines, the ability to connect yourself to anywhere on Earth. Enter Joe and Grecia, also known as Joy Bubbles. Joe was blind, but he had perfect pitch, and not just good at karaoke perfect pitch, the kind where he could whistle a 2600 hertz tone with his lips. As a child, he discovered this accidentally while playing with telephones, as one does, and realized he could literally whistle his way into free phone calls. This man's superpower was his mouth, and he used it to commit telecommunications fraud, which, honestly, respect. But the most famous phone phreak wasn't a human whistle. It was a cereal prize. John Draper discovered that a toy whistle included in boxes of Cap'n Crunch cereal, a free prize intended for children, happened to emit a perfect 2600 hertz tone. You glue up one of the holes, blow the whistle, and congratulations, you've just hacked the largest telephone network on the planet using a breakfast food giveaway. Draper earned the nickname Captain Crunch, and I genuinely cannot think of a more chaotic origin story for a hacker alias. He didn't choose the name, the cereal chose him. In 1971, Esquire published an article called Secrets of the Little Blue Box, which exposed the entire phone phreaking underground to mainstream America. The article was read by many people, including 2 college students in California named Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. Yes, those 2. Woz and Jobs started building their own blue boxes, devices that could generate all 12 tones AT&T used for call routing, and sold them to fellow Berkeley students. Jobs reportedly once used one to prank call the Vatican and ask to speak to the Pope. The co-founder of Apple got his start in electronics by building illegal phone hacking devices and crank calling religious leaders. And people wonder why tech founders have big egos. By the mid-1970s, AT&T estimated they were losing $30 million per year to phone phreaking. In 1983, they finally upgraded their systems to separate voice and signaling, which killed the whole scene. But by then, something new had arrived: personal computers. And the phone phreaks didn't retire, they adapted. They became computer hackers. The curiosity that drove them to explore telephone networks found a new, infinitely larger playground. The 1980s and 1990s were the golden age of individual hackers. These weren't state-sponsored cyber armies or organized crime syndicates. These were teenagers in their bedrooms, discovering that the world's most powerful institutions had the digital security of a wet paper bag. Let me introduce you to Kevin Mitnick, widely considered the most famous hacker in history. And his story is so absurd, it inspired a Hollywood movie that somehow made it seem less ridiculous than reality. In 1979, at age 16, Mitnick was already a phone freak. He'd learned the classic techniques: social engineering, dumpster diving for manuals, sweet-talking operators into giving him access. By 17, he'd hacked into Pacific Bell just by charming employees into giving him their passwords. His technique wasn't some sophisticated code-breaking algorithm. It was call someone, pretend to be tech support, ask for their credentials. And it worked, repeatedly, on major corporations. In 1982, Mitnick hacked NORAD, the North American Defense Command, the organization tracking incoming nuclear missiles. He was still a teenager. This hack allegedly inspired the 1983 movie War Games, where a kid nearly starts World War III by hacking into military computers, except the movie made it look harder than it apparently was. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Mitnick broke into systems at Motorola, Nokia, IBM, and allegedly the NSA. The FBI claimed he caused $80 million in damages. His supporters said most of the damages were just embarrassment costs from corporations admitting they got owned by one guy who kept asking nicely for passwords. Mitnick became the FBI's most wanted hacker. He was a fugitive for 2.5 years, using cloned cell phones to hide his location because, of course, the phone freak skills came back. When they finally caught him in 1995, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. 8 months of that, solitary confinement. Why solitary? Because federal prosecutors convinced the judge that Kevin Mitnick could start a nuclear war by whistling into a prison payphone. I cannot emphasize enough. That was an actual argument made in an actual courtroom. They thought he was a wizard. After prison, Mitnick went legit. He founded a security consulting company and spent the rest of his career teaching companies how to defend against people exactly like his younger self. He passed away in 2023, remembered as both a cautionary tale and a folk hero, depending on who you ask. But Mitnick wasn't alone. The 80s and 90s had a whole cast of characters. Kevin Powelson hacked ARPANET, the Pentagon's computer network, at age 17. The government caught him but let him off with a warning because he was a minor. A warning for hacking the Pentagon. Shockingly, he did not take this as a sign to stop. In 1990, a Los Angeles radio station held a call-in contest. The 102nd caller wins a Porsche 944. Powelson took over all the phone lines into the station and guaranteed himself the winning spot. He won the car, $20,000 in cash, and a vacation. He was eventually caught and served 51 months in prison. After that, he became a journalist, covering cybersecurity for Wired magazine. The poetic justice of a hacker becoming a reporter who covers hackers is, chef's kiss. And then there's Robert Morris, who in 1988 created the first internet worm, entirely by accident. Morris was a Cornell graduate student who wanted to see how big the internet was. His worm was supposed to spread quietly, counting machines as it went. But he made a coding mistake. Even if a computer was already infected, the worm would reinfect it 14% of the time anyway. This meant the worm kept stacking copies of itself until computers ground to a halt. Within 24 hours, roughly 6,000 computers were infected, about 10% of the entire internet at the time. NASA, Stanford, Harvard, the Pentagon, all down. Damage is estimated between $100,000 and $10 million, depending on who's counting. Morris became the first person convicted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. He got probation, community service, and a $10,000 fine. Then he became a professor at MIT and co-founded a startup accelerator called Y Combinator, which funded companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, and Reddit. The man who accidentally broke the internet eventually helped build a significant portion of the modern internet, only in tech. If the 1990s taught us anything, it's that giving teenagers computers and free time produces either billion-dollar companies or federal investigations, sometimes both. In 1999, a 15-year-old named Jonathan James, online alias Comrade, hacked into NASA, not a small part of NASA, the systems controlling the International Space Station. He downloaded source code worth $1.7 million that managed the life support systems, temperature, humidity, the stuff that keeps astronauts breathing. NASA had to shut down their computers for 3 weeks because of a 10th grader. James also hacked the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, intercepting over 3,300 internal messages and capturing usernames and passwords. He was doing this on a Pentium 266 in his bedroom. The specs on that computer are now worse than your smart refrigerator. He became the first juvenile incarcerated for cybercrime in the United States. The sentence was 6 months in a detention facility and house arrest until he turned 18. He was also banned from recreational computer use, which is like telling a fish it can't swim for fun. James' story has a tragic ending. In 2008, he was investigated in connection with a massive credit card breach at TJX, even though he maintained he wasn't involved. He took his own life at 24, leaving a note saying he believed he'd be prosecuted for crimes he didn't commit. The hackers actually responsible were caught later, and James's involvement was never proven. Then there's Gary McKinnon, a Scottish systems administrator who committed what the U.S. government called the biggest military computer hack of all time. His motivation? UFOs. Between 2001 and 2002, McKinnon hacked into 97 NASA and U.S. military computers looking for evidence of alien spacecraft and free energy technology. He claimed he found a photo of a cigar-shaped craft, but his dial-up connection was too slow to download it before he got kicked off. The U.S. wanted to extradite him and prosecute him for causing $700,000 in damages, including allegedly deleting critical files and shutting down the Army's Military District of Washington network for 24 hours. The British government ultimately blocked extradition in 2012 on human rights grounds, citing McKinnon's Asperger syndrome and depression. He left a message on one military computer: "Your security is crap. I am solo. I will continue to disrupt at the highest levels." And honestly, points for honesty. He wasn't wrong about the security. The early hackers were driven by curiosity, ego, or, in Gary McKinnon's case, a sincere belief that the government was hiding alien technology. But somewhere along the way, someone realized you could make serious money doing this. Enter Albert Gonzalez, who orchestrated the largest credit card theft in American history. And his operation had a name that sounds like it came from a 50 Cent album: Operation Get Rich or Die Trying. I wish I were making that up. Gonzalez started hacking young. By 14, he'd broken into NASA because apparently that's just what overachieving teenagers did in the 2000s. He got in trouble and became a Secret Service informant, helping them bust other hackers. But here's where it gets good. While working as an informant making $75,000 a year from the government, he was also running his own criminal hacking ring, double dipping on federal crime. Bold strategy. From 2005 to 2008, Gonzalez and his crew stole over 170 million credit and debit card numbers from companies including TJX, that's TJ Maxx, Marshalls, BJ's Wholesale Club, Office Max, Barnes & Noble, and Heartland Payment Systems. The Heartland breach alone captured 130 million card numbers, the single largest data breach ever recorded at the time. Their technique? Driving around in cars with laptops, looking for retailers with weak Wi-Fi security, a method called war driving. They'd find a vulnerable store, install malware on the payment systems, and siphon off credit card data as customers made purchases. It's like robbing a bank, except the bank doesn't know it's being robbed and the customers hand you the money directly. When the feds finally caught Gonzalez, they seized his Miami condo, a BMW, a Tiffany diamond ring, Rolex watches, and $1.1 million in cash buried in his parents' backyard in plastic bags, buried in the yard, like a hacker pirate. He threw himself a $75,000 birthday party. This man was not subtle. Gonzalez was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever for computer crime at the time. Companies reported over $200 million in losses from his hacking spree. The Gonzalez era marked a shift. Hacking was no longer about curiosity or even ideology. It was about money. And where there's money, there's organization. In the 2000s, a new breed emerged. Hacktivists, hackers with a political agenda, and the most famous group started as a joke on a forum known for anime arguments and chaos. Anonymous began on 4chan around 2003. Early on, they were just internet pranksters. Their first major target was the Church of Scientology in 2008, after the church tried to remove an embarrassing Tom Cruise video from the internet. Anonymous responded by launching denial of service attacks on Scientology websites and ordering unpaid pizzas to their headquarters. Chaotic? Yes. Effective? Surprisingly, also yes. Anonymous later went after Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal for cutting off payments to WikiLeaks. They targeted governments during the Arab Spring. They took on ISIS. Their decentralized structure, we are legend. We do not forgive, we do not forget, made them both effective and impossible to eliminate. Then came LulzSec, a smaller, more aggressive anonymous splinter group whose name literally means laughing at your security. Their motto, we do it for the lulz. In 50 days of 2011, LulzSec hacked Sony Pictures, the CIA website, PBS, and the Arizona State Police. They'd post announcements on Twitter mocking their victims. When Sony got breached, LulzSec released a statement saying they were motivated by Sony's legal action against the hacker who jailbroke the PlayStation 3. The leader of LulzSec, Hector Monsager, alias Sabu, was eventually caught and flipped by the FBI. He led them to other members who turned out to be mostly teenagers in the UK. The mastermind of international cyber chaos was a 16-year-old from Oxford. Which brings us to the present. Today's hacking landscape is dominated by nation-states and professional criminal enterprises. The days of lone wolves with modems are largely over. Now it's Russian intelligence services, Chinese cyber units, and ransomware gangs operating like Fortune 500 companies, with HR departments, customer service lines, and profit sharing. In 2020, Russian hackers breached SolarWinds, a company that makes network monitoring software used by thousands of organizations, including the U.S. Treasury, Homeland Security, and the Pentagon. They hid malware in a routine software update, and for 9 months, nobody noticed. The entire Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the office whose job is to prevent this exact thing, got hacked. If that's not a resume-killing mistake, I don't know what is. In 2021, a ransomware group called DarkSide attacked Colonial Pipeline, which carries 45% of the East Coast fuel. They got in through an inactive VPN account that didn't have two-factor authentication. One old password. That's all it took to shut down gas supplies to half the eastern seaboard. Colonial paid $4.4 million in ransom. A FBI deputy director later said, "The ransom is not the cost. The cost is the economic disruption." But here's the twist. Teenagers are still causing chaos. In 2021-2022, a group called Lapsus hacked Microsoft, NVIDIA, Samsung, T-Mobile, Uber, and Rockstar Games. They leaked the source code for the unreleased Grand Theft Auto 6, causing absolute panic at one of gaming's biggest companies. The group's key members? Teenagers. Ariane Curtage was 16 and 17 years old during most of the hacks. He continued hacking even after being arrested and released on bail, using an Amazon Fire Stick, a hotel TV, and his phone to break into Rockstar Games while under police protection. He was sentenced to indefinite detention in a psychiatric hospital. The judge determined he remained a danger because, and I quote, he had expressed a desire to return to cybercrime as soon as possible. Some things never change. Give a curious teenager a computer, and eventually they'll break something important. From cereal box whistles to state-sponsored cyber warfare, hacking has evolved from mischief to a geopolitical weapon. The phone freaks of the 1970s would barely recognize today's landscape. But the motivation? Curiosity, ego, ideology, money. That hasn't changed since those teenagers started switching phone lines in 1878. The difference is scale. Kevin Mitnick broke into companies one at a time. Albert Gonzalez stole 170 million credit cards. The SolarWinds hackers compromised thousands of organizations in one update. And the defenses? Still not great. The Colonial Pipeline was breached through an old password. Lapses tricked employees into sharing credentials with basic social engineering, the exact same technique Mitnick used in 1979. Nearly 50 years of computer security research, and we're still getting fooled by the same tricks. Maybe the real hack was the friends we fished along the way. For more Stick IT, be sure to click the link, and remember, the more you know, the better you tech. So stick with it.